And we are back, folks, on Michigan Insider, michigan.247sports.com. I'm your host, Alejandro Zúñiga, here with episode 4 of our series, Behind Enemy Lines, where we take a closer look at the Michigan football team's upcoming opponent. It is finally here. The non-conference season is over. The Big Ten season has arrived. And I'm so excited to have with me Wes Brown, who covers all things Maryland Terrapins for 24/7 Sports, to give us a preview of what to expect this Saturday when the Wolverines welcome Maryland to the Big House on Big Noon Saturday. Wes, how you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me.
It's fun to have you on. Fun for the non-conference season to be over. Listen, I'd be lying if I said that Michigan fans and Michigan, the team itself, will admit that they haven't really played anyone so far this year. I mean, the players, the coaches kind of tiptoe around this, but we don't have to. Colorado State going through a rebuild, Hawaii going through one of the bigger rebuilds you'll ever see, and then UConn, which has been a really struggling program for a decade or so, haven't presented much of a test. So there's some question marks as the Terps come in, an established program that seems to be on the upswing, an offense that's led obviously by Taulia Tagovailoa and a deep core of receivers, and quite honestly, some athletes, even on a defense that maybe isn't elite, but some athletes that are at the level that Michigan didn't see on UConn or Hawaii or Colorado State. So we're going to start with the program as a whole. Maryland went to a bowl game last year. It was an upswing for Mike Locksley and his first winning season. A great bowl performance against Virginia Tech, and now 5 wins in a row. Some good investments into the athletic facilities. Seems like a program on the upswing, with a 3-0 start to the non-conference season. So why don't you take us through what the past 12 months or so have been, I guess 10 months since Maryland and Michigan last met, and what the non-conference season has been like.
Yeah, I mean, kind of like you said, it's definitely been an interesting, 10 months here. Locksley, ever since coming in 2019, it's been about a rebuild, bringing in his players, his coaches, going through different assistants, figuring out what works, what doesn't. Obviously, when you're able to bring in a quarterback like Taulia, it makes it a lot easier. Having someone who, he recruited to Alabama and, can trust, and he knows that family well. So all that kind of factored in. The addition of Rakim Jarrett in the 2020 class as a flip from LSU was a big time local pull as well. So, bringing all these pieces together, all the time they've spent together, it all kind of culminated in last year, where they were finally able to get that 6-win mark for the first time in a number of years. Going to a bowl game, getting a win over an old ACC opponent. It's definitely a very exciting time. And then even though it hasn't been the cleanest non-conference run, I think if you ask any coach if they want to just start conference play at 3-0, they'll all say yes. So I think at this point, even if Michigan hasn't necessarily been tested as much and Maryland hasn't loved their play, I'm sure both sides are happy to be 3-0.
Sure. And for some context there, the non-conference wins here for Maryland are over Buffalo, at Charlotte, in fact. So they went on the road and beat Charlotte 56-21. And then in week 3, hosted SMU and came from behind with a more, I guess, impressive defensive performance in terms of holding the Mustangs to, I think, just 7 points in the second half for that win. But we're going to go ahead and get started with the Maryland offense. And really, when you're talking about Maryland's offense, it all starts with Taulia Tagovailoa. He's a guy that Mike Locksley in Big Ten Media Days called him the most underrated player in college football. And Michigan, and certainly the rest of the Big Ten, has seen pieces of that. This is a guy who can make plays happen. He's got a cannon for an arm. He's not afraid to take the deep shot. He can make plays with his feet, keep things going, but has also, at least in previous seasons, had a bit of a propensity for, some puzzling decisions and maybe not making the smartest the smartest plays when he's back in the pocket. Seemed to me when I was watching the SMU tape that he was more of a game manager in that game. Not, some people use that as a veiled criticism, but the way I saw it, he was making some really smart decisions. He was efficient, and that's part of what helped the Terps come from behind. What's his season been so far?
Yeah, I mean, kind of like you said, so he came in and that first game he played at Northwestern, he had a number of turnovers through interceptions, wasn't able to bounce back. And then you saw sort of a similar thing in the Iowa debacle last year. He always seemed to have an issue for turning the ball over and then trying too hard to make up for it, and then therefore turning it over again. This year he's number 3 in the country in completion percentage. He has turned into more of a game manager, but it's mostly because he's just learning how to take a step back, make the smart decision, and just lead the offense. He's realizing he has a fully returning top 7 group of offensive linemen in front of him. He's got 4 wide receivers deep. He's got 2 really strong tight ends. So he's got weapons all around him, and a group of young running backs that have really stuck out as well. So he doesn't have to be the guy to make those plays. He doesn't have to, try and throw it through a tight window just to make something happen. So he's definitely learning how to do all that. But the pieces around him and the time they've all spent together has definitely been a key factor in that.
You just mentioned some of the other weapons around him. Roman Hemby, redshirt freshman running back. He's a guy who really blew up in the SMU game. He had over 200 yards rushing and receiving combined from scrimmage. And then I noticed that Maryland also rotates in some other running backs. Also, of course, you got the tight end, Corey Dyches, and a good slate, a deep slate of receivers. Led, I think, the name the name going into the season was Dante Demas, who was returning from injury. I know he was able to get back for that opener. It doesn't look like the production's all been there quite yet. When you look at the receiver room first, how is Dante, and who else in that receiver room should Michigan fans be looking at?
Yeah, Dante's doing well. He's been able to play, but he has been kind of kept on a pitch count per se. There's not really a need to rush him back when you can also have Rakim Jarrett, Jacob Copeland, Jay Sean Jones also coming back from injury. Ty Felton's another young weapon, and then they've got some freshmen that they brought in and transferred to the receiver room. So they've got a lot of talent in the room. So there's not really a need to push all the top guys quite yet. My guess is with Big Ten play, we'll start to see a lot more of that. But yeah, I mean, the biggest one for Dante was last Saturday. He dropped a wide open ball that went right through his hands. That would have made it inside the red zone, but instead the next play was a Rakim Jarrett 48-yard touchdown. So kind of making up for that moment there as a group, but there's so much talent in that room. Jacob Copeland coming in from Florida is a guy that Locksley knew from the recruiting process at Alabama as well. So there's just so many weapons all around the board. They could legitimately have 3 guys push for NFL aspirations after this year. So it's hard to run out of weapons per se.
And quite the difference for Michigan, which has faced a redshirt freshman making his first college start at quarterback. The Yellen at Hawaii, who was the backup going into the season and was starting because the starter was hurt. And in the UConn game, a true freshman again starting because the starter coming into the season was hurt. Yeah, a lot more weapons on Maryland. Alejandro Zúñiga talking Maryland, Michigan with Wes Brown, also of 24/7. Wes, we just touched on the offense, and when you talk Maryland football, you have to start with the offense, which is electrifying, has playmakers all across the board. Obviously, though, football is a multifaceted game, and the Maryland defense is an area I think that had a lot more question marks going into this season. Coach Mike Locksley talked about how excited he was coming into fall camp that a lot of the players were healthy, and that so much of the pieces, so many of the pieces had gone out injured last year, that just having these guys back was a step up. In terms of the Maryland defense, seemed to struggle a bit against SMU last week, gave up more than 500 yards. Certainly, they didn't put themselves in a good position with, I believe it was 15 penalties for 140 yards, something along those lines. But they made the plays when it counted. They got a few takeaways. They made a few, fourth down stops in the red zone and shut down an offense in the second half that had looked pretty unstoppable in the first half. What, as Maryland is turning toward Michigan, which has the best, is the best scoring offense in college football right now, what are some of the things that Maryland can throw out there to slow down these Wolverines?
Yeah, so Maryland's got a really deep group of, defensive linemen up front, which, has been probably its biggest pitfall in the Big Ten is, not necessarily having the size and strength to compete up front with some of these offensive lines. But they've got some guys who have been there for 2 or 3 years now, similar to the offensive side of the ball. They've got a mixed group of or linebackers who, they've got some older guys. They've got a true freshman in Jay Sean Barham, who decided to come to Maryland late in the process. And he's put in a ton of work as a true freshman and stepped into a key role there. And then the defensive backs, they've got, 3 corners who Locksley taps as NFL guys, and, Tar Heap Still, Deontay Banks, and Jacorian Bennett, who was a JUCO transfer a couple years ago. And then it's all, tailed by, Bo Braid and Dante Trader, who, step in for the likes of Nick Cross at safety. Each of them got an interception last game to help kind of, ignite the offense and give them more of a chance after all those penalties. So it's kind of a mixed bag of a young group and old group, but there are a ton of athletes on that side of the ball. So it should be interesting how they're able to key in on Michigan. One thing that Locksley has mentioned is, they like the ability, kind of like Charlotte ran multiple quarterbacks, but then Maryland ended up in a situation where neither of their quarterbacks started playing. So they, struggled a little bit in keeping the number 3 quarterback, in tabs because they didn't have the film on him. He only played a few snaps here and there. But hopefully with Michigan, being down to, who the quarterback's going to be, hopefully that helps them in their preparation, being able to key in a little bit.
Yeah, I was listening to Locksley's press conference yesterday, and Michigan's running with JJ McCarthy, and well, there is no clear backup at this point because Cade McNamara is hurt, but there are now a few games of JJ on film, and JJ came in last year too against the Terps and made some plays there. So will be interesting to see how the Terps can slow down Michigan, and honestly, how a Michigan offense under JJ McCarthy looks as he's the starter for the first time against a Power 5 team, because he played a few series in the opener against Colorado State and then took over the starting role. But again, he's only played really a half in 2 games because they've been such blowouts. Anyway, Wes, want to turn it over to you now. We've talked a lot about Tagovailoa. We've talked a lot about the offensive weapons. Is there one player for you that you think Michigan fans should be watching when the Terps come to the Big House on Saturday?
Yeah, I think kind of like you mentioned, everyone will look at the passing game. Everyone will look at the receivers and the quarterback. But the running backs are really making a lot of noise. Not just Roman Hemby, but also Antoine Littleton. He came in at 6 foot, 285 pounds, and has really cut his body down to, a clean 240. But he's a big back. They had that in the past with Penny Boone. But having, the ability to trade off, they've got 4 running backs who they can put in there, 2 redshirt freshmen, 1 sophomore, and a true freshman. So the big thing for Maryland this year is having a balanced offense, especially when people expect them to pass, expect them to just throw the ball around. So I would definitely look out for Hemby and Littleton, because I think the key in trying to come out of the Big House with another victory is definitely going to, be in a balanced aspect, because they're probably not going to win if they throw the ball 50 times.
Littleton, not so little. I'm sure he's never heard that before, but it was very interesting to that point of balance to see the Terps lined up in a true goal line formation, power I, and hand it off to a 240-pound back who can, punch the ball into the end zone. Not exactly what you'd expect when you think Maryland football, but it works, and it seemed to keep SMU off balance a bit. All right, we're going to close with the way I love to close, which is putting our reputations on the line. Wes, mainly you putting your reputation on the line here. I asked all of our guests for one prediction for the game. Doesn't necessarily have to be a score, doesn't necessarily have to be anything. It's really what you want to make of it. One thing that you expect to see on Saturday at Michigan Stadium.
Yeah, I mean, kind of like you mentioned, I mentioned there's going to be a balanced attack. One thing we haven't necessarily seen the most of from Maryland this year is its tight end play. I think it would be, really interesting to throw that wrinkle more in, against Michigan. You mentioned Corey Dyches, but CJ Dupree is also another very strong running back. They like to call him a baby Gronk. He really fits that mold right there. So I think if Maryland's gonna really compete, they're gonna have to throw some wrinkles in there. So I'll go with some stronger tight end play there in the receiving game.
Well, we'll find out on Saturday, as I mentioned. Michigan, Maryland opening up their Big Ten slates at noon at Michigan Stadium. For myself, Alejandro Zúñiga, Wes, thank you so much for joining us. Obviously 247sports.com for all of our coverage, college football, college basketball, recruiting, michigan.247sports.com for the Michigan Insider. Wes, I'll see you at the Big House on Saturday. And for everyone else listening, thank you so much. Please rate, subscribe, tell your friends, and we'll see you at the Big House. Peace.